I tried, John. Let's see here. Good morning. Good to see everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're a little bit over. I know we got some. Of course, we're probably dropping off food and everything, getting ready for the big Christmas gathering today. Let's see here. There we go. All right. We're going to be in Genesis 25, Genesis chapter 25. Bill is on his way. No, he had to run to the airport this morning. He's on his way back. But he said he's pretty sure he'd be here for class. We'll see. If not, he said, Bill me today. All right. As we said, we're going to look at Genesis 25 this morning. I know it talks about, it's actually titled The Birth of Jacob and Esau. We see there, of course, not a whole lot of information going with them right here in this moment at the end a little bit, but I see more about the final days of Abraham. Really is the best way to look at this chapter here that we see coming to a close, talking about his family members and so on, and how life went. So before we do that, let's get into our questions. We're going to start with the first one. Who had been riding the colt which the disciples brought from Jerusalem to Jesus? No one. Had never been ridden. What did Jesus say would happen to the fig tree which had no fruit? Wither or shrivel up and die. Exactly right. That's exactly it. What did God permit Satan to do to Job's body?
Everything would take his life.
Everything would take his life. What did he put on his body though? What did he remember? Boils. Exactly right. And used the pot shred to scrape him off. Just terrible. I mean, probably almost felt like leprosy the way it was, the way it was described. Why did the two angels tell Lot to get his family out of Sodom? Because God was going to destroy it, exactly. Genesis 19, 12 to 14. Next one, Genesis 20, verse 7. God told Abimelech that Abraham was a blank.
I'm a prophet.
A prophet. He was a prophet, without a doubt. And what did God say would happen to Abimelech if he did not return Sarah to Abraham? He would die, and everybody in his household, basically, everyone. It says, and that's a big thing we see there. So yes or no? The next one. Did Ishmael and Isaac grow up? We're waiting for him to get here. He's on his way. Okay. Yes or no? Did Ishmael and Isaac grow up in Abraham's house together? No. They didn't grow up together. Remember, we saw Isaac would have been about 3 years old when he departed. That Ishmael being 17 around that age. So yeah, so let's jump to the next one. What did God tell Abraham to do as a test of his faith? To offer up his son Isaac, exactly right. The way the Bible talks about it says he did it, even though we know he didn't actually sacrifice him, but he went through what God said. Which brings us to this one. Who stopped Abraham from offering Isaac? The angel of the Lord, which would be Jesus Christ. We understand there. Next would be, what did Abraham offer in place of Isaac?
A ram.
He gave a ram. He said the lamb would be the offering. We know lamb, of course, not referring to Jesus Christ, but there was a ram caught in the thicket with his horns. And that's what he did that with, exactly. The next one. From what country did Abraham not want Isaac to marry a wife? Canaan. Go to Canaan, that's where they were living. Exactly right. He didn't want to do that. So he said, whom did Abraham want as a wife for Isaac? He didn't actually have a person specifically, but somebody from who? From his family, exactly right. From his family area up there in Haran, as we would see, and that's exactly where we see Rebekah coming from. Next one, according to Rebekah's father and brother, who had made the decision concerning her going to Canaan? Genesis 24, 50 through 51. She did. She made the decision herself, exactly right. And they wanted her to stay a while. She was like, no, I'm ready to go tomorrow. And so we see that exactly. Which brings us now to Abraham. So we're going to look at it here, as we said. This is really about, it's titled Esau and Jacob, Jacob and Esau, but really when we look at this, like I said, this is really the final days of Abraham, what we see happening here. They go through some names that are part of his families. We're going to see in a moment. I'll go ahead and read verses 1 through 4 so someone doesn't have to read through all these names that are here. We'll go ahead and start with that as we look to the birth of Jacob and Esau in these days. So we begin with chapter 25, verses 1 through 4. And it says, Abraham again took a wife. Now remember, the reason he's taking a wife is Sarah has what? She's died, right? Sarah's died. And it says, took a wife, and her name was Kutra. And she bore him Zimron, Joksan, Median, Ishbak, and Shu. Jokskin begot Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashram, Letisham, and Limon, and the sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abidah, and Aladad. All these were the children of Keturah. So as we look at this here, we see these were also not just names of people, but actually names of what will become later cities and countries and so on, as we see the way things were going as the blessed them God did of the land of Canaan. The final years of Abraham after bearing Sarah and choosing a wife for Isaac are summed up in basically his remarriage to Keturah and the children she had in these 4 verses. Always thinking ahead with wisdom, though, which he had given, gifts to his later sons. The scriptures were very clear, as we're going to see in these next few verses, that he gave all that he had, very important, to Isaac. And we need to see that there. So let's go ahead and read that. If someone read verses 5 and 6, please.
And Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, which Abraham had, and while he was still living, he sent them eastward away from Isaac, his son, to the country of the east.
Thank you. So that'd be forward towards the Assyria direction. So what we see with him is that we find that, of course, Abraham had his wife, had Keturah, had talked about concubines. Anybody who was outside of Isaac, he didn't want them around him. And because he didn't want him to be what? Influenced into the Canaanite ways, or influenced in the Egyptian ways, or influenced into anything that would take them away from God. So Abraham made sure they were taken care of, and he sent them away. And some say, how could Abraham do this? Well, Abraham's about to die, and he knows it. He knows his days are coming to an end. And in fact, that's what we read here in these last few verses, 25, 7 through 11, is that Abraham passed away. He goes to be with God. And it's very quick. We're like, whoa, that was fast. I mean, it's actually, we can say fast. We've dealt with 100 years of Abraham. Then we basically meet him with 75 in that area, 70, 75, and he's going to die at 175. The Bible's going to tell us here. If someone will read that, please.
This is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Miriam, in the field of Ephron, and the son of Zahor the Hittite. The field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer-lahai-roi.
Thank you. So as we look at this, Mamre is very familiar to us, Mamre, as we see, because of the trees. We talk about the tree of Abraham, we know the location in that area and so on, and different things going on here. Let's just go and look at a few things. First of all, we want to get an idea of where Isaac dwelt at, where he's dwelling in. As we see, he's going to be not far from his dad, but far enough, a little bit from there. But of course, now with Abraham gone, Isaac would be taking over, would take over the area of the seed. This area on the map, to give you an idea, is here it is right here, Beer-lahai-roi. And as we see this here, it's basically about 65 miles from Jerusalem. So it kind of gives you an idea of where everything's at right here. You see the Dead Sea. Remember, this is the old part of the Dead Sea, and so you come pretty much straight across from that. A little nice fertile area that good for cattle and good for livestock, and that was important. So God called Abraham when he was 75, as we said, and allowed Abraham to live 100 years in the Promised Land. Things to remind us just real quick that happened during his time and his age. 75 years old is when he entered the Promised Land. We know 86 was the birth of Ishmael. 99, we see that God promised Isaac's birth, and then 100, Isaac was actually born. Sarah died when Abraham was 127 years old, and we know, of course, that Isaac marries Rebekah at 140 years of the age of Abraham, and then 160 Jacob and Esau are born, and now we're 175, Abraham died. So we're 15 years into basically where that Esau and Jacob and Esau are already born, and we see them in. And so he actually got to see his grandsons, which was a great thing. He got to spend some time with them actually for 15 years. And anybody's grandparent knows how great that is. and how wonderful and exciting about that. And even though these two didn't always get along, the two brothers here, we see at this age, maybe they weren't as bad, but we do know it's going to get worse as they get older. But give you an idea where they're buried at. I want to show over to this. Hebron, of course, we said, was the area north, and just remember that. So here's Hebron here, there's Beryl. So you see the difference of where Isaac moved to. Isaac got out of the mountains, and Isaac was not a mountain man. His brother was more of a field man. Isaac was more of a, what you'd say, an educated tent man. Put it back then, because they didn't have buildings in that sense, but he lived in a tent, and he worked in his tent, and basically that's what we see. And we'll talk more about that. So here's Hebron. This is where we see Abraham, Isaac, of course Sarah. Abraham and Sarah would be buried there. And then you see the others would come there also to be born, to be buried. Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, Jacob, Abner would all be buried in the same area. And what they call, look at right here, the patriarch, I can't remember now, what do we call it? Basically the cave of the patriarchs is the way to look at it and what it's explaining. This is where this is at. When you see this here, it's very visual there. Or you find this main art that we see and understand, but I want you to look at a few things. You see this area right here, this wall, as we're looking over here. This comes to the left inside of it, and you see this little section over here. I know it's hard to see, but this is a fenced-in area right there, and it's this right here that you're looking at. So here's the fence that goes around this that's down here. Here's that location again. So you see the major inner walls here, and then there's walls that go around and come back around this way. So this is what we find. This is the cave of Abraham and Sarah, and then this is where they're buried. This was the original entrance into this cave as you come down into it, and you can see the old style wall here of some type that's there, and this is all, of course, carved out as you see for them to go down in there. Today, to give you an idea, this is what it looks like on the underground. Basically, here's your original. Now we got we have a stairway that comes through with a corridor. You have another one also that comes down here, what they call the threshold to the Garden of Eden, which, of course, that's not true. We don't know that. But you have your first cave and you have your inner caves. So you have these major caves that are right here in this area. This is where they're at. This is what's over the actual entrance now. Not that big opening. You can't get through it. But the actual entrance where it could be unlocked and people could actually go down there if they had to do something. Nobody's allowed to go down there. They don't do that anymore. There's been a lot of things here since with the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews because of everything that takes place between them. During wartime, there were times where the Jews were able to get more of this area than what they had before. So it's really interesting to look at here. There's an area they worship that the Muslims worship on one side of the wall in the room, and Jews worship on the other side. Kind of interesting to see the way that is. And but they call it worship, and but really we say if you're not doing the things of the old law, because that's what they consider themselves, sacrifices and so on, and really worshiping. So, but I just want to point out that that's where this is. It's a very, of course, important site to the Jewish history, but it's also not. Abraham's not only about Jewish history; it's about our history too. And we see that comes through, and where Jesus came through there, and as we look to that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read real quick. The families of Ishmael are mentioned here. Remember, we really didn't see much with Ishmael and, of course, that of Jacob. Much going on between them. I said Jacob, not Jacob. Isaac. I'll do that as we see here as the two brothers. But we do see them come back together to bury their father, and that's they didn't get along well with a lot of things, but that was a good thing, because we always know that seems like it happens in every family, right? Every families that don't get along and so on. If someone dies, especially a patriarch, the majority of the family comes together for that moment and that situation. So just real quick, I'll read these two bunch of names. Genesis 25, 12 through 18, just so we did it. Now is the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's son, from Hagar the Egyptian. Sarah's maidservant was born to Abraham, and these were the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to the generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nabajoth, Kedar, Abedel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Mesa, Hadar, Kema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. And then it continues to go on. So they were the sons of Ishmael. These were their names by their towns and their settlements. Notice here, very important, 12 princes according to their nations. Remember, what did Jesus promise? What did God, Jesus, we said it being pre-incarnate God. What did he promise? What did he promise Hagar? That her son would have what? That there would be 12 princes according to their nations. And that that's interesting because when you go to Abraham's side with Jacob, what do we have over there? With Isaac, excuse me, what do we have on that side? We have 12, we're going to end up having 12 tribes. Well, it's going to end up coming all the way when you go to Joseph to that time as we see that. So it continues to read these words. It says, these were the years. Now, that ain't them. Don't think I'm saying it's them. It's just 12 others. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died. And he was gathered to his people. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria. Remember, going toward Assyria, that's the main area where we see Abraham sending the majority of anybody that wasn't a Jew. I say not a Jew. They're not Jews. But actually, part of what God would want them, that's not a Canaanite. He sent all those people in that direction. He died in the presence of all of his brethren. So as we look at this, and then we jump in now, we're actually going to see the birth of Esau and Jacob. And we see the two of them, of what happens here. As we said during our last class, Isaac was 40 years old when he was married. You remember that, 40 years old at that point, that we would see. And Rebekah, that he married, and she remained childless for many years. Their life here kind of looks like whose for a little bit? Abraham and Sarah. Yeah, exactly right. His mom and dad. And so after Isaac's plea to God, here it is, plea to God, God intervenes and allows him to have a son. And we know he's actually going to have more as we see this happening. Genesis 25, as we're going to see here, verses 19 through 21. If someone will go ahead and read that for us, please.
This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah his wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived.
Thank you. So after we see this happening, she conceives. She ends up conceiving what? Twins. Exactly right. She ends up conceiving twins. And the Bible talks about that they were doing what in her stomach? It says they were wrestling. They were fighting, wrestling. The things were going on in there, and and it really concerned her. We're going to see in these next few verses. So she wants to know. She inquires of God, which is a great thing to see her moving in that direction too, because we know there's a few things about Rebekah we learn later about her, but this is good to see she's with the Lord, and he's concerned for her too, and he's going to talk to her. And so let's go ahead and read 25, 22 through 23, please.
But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire. She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger."
Thank you. So as we see this, it's kind of interesting the way she starts off. The children struggled together with her. She said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So more than likely she saw somebody, some type of person that was over, would take care of the women, the birth, and we see this, and different things. They said, "Oh, you're just fine," and so on. And she's like, "I'm fine. I need to ask God what's going on here and what's happening." He tells her something interesting, that two nations are in your womb. Two people shall be separate from your bodies. We just read. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall be what? Serve the younger. It's very important to see, very important to understand, because here's God telling her, coming straight out, this is what's going to happen. This is what needs to happen. And, now is God telling her to do what she's going to do? Lie about it and so on? Not at all. None whatsoever. God's just saying what was going to take place. So later we know the Holy Spirit actually reveals the true significance of these two, we see of Esau and Jacob, for us today. It goes, it's in the book of Romans, where we see Paul writing the book of Romans to the Roman Empire, and to the Roman Church, and it shows us what the deal is with these two nations, with Esau and that of Jacob, and what would be going on here. After Israel's downfall, remember the cross, terrible downfall, and a disgraceful response from Israel to God's plea to return through Christ, through the gospel, to come back to him the way they needed to be. Paul expressed his deep sorrow. And this is what he did. And he's going to explain in this also about these two nations as we get through this. So I'm going to read for us Romans chapter 9, verses 1 through 5, please.
I tell the truth in Christ, I am not lying. My conscience also bearing my witness in the Holy Spirit, that I have great sorrow and continual grief in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were accused from Christ for my brethren, my countrymen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertain the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the service of God, and the promises, of whom are the fathers, and from whom, according to the flesh, Christ came, who is over all, the eternally blessed God. Amen.
Thank you. So here, Paul's basically trying to say, that, he's been accursed by other Jews, because Paul was a rabbi, we'd say Hebrew to Hebrews. He was a rabbi basically trained under Gamaliel, one of the greatest ever. You come to the Jewish teachers, rabbis, and everything with him, and he said, I would wish, I would just pray that my Jewish people would come, my Jewish families would come to the understanding of who needs to be in Christ, that we all need to be in him. And it was a deep sorrow for him to see them not follow him as we see that. So God wanted it clearly understood that this was not a surprise about Israel, about how they would react, what they would do, and of course the crucifixion of Jesus. It was not something that in a way reflected on his plan at all. He had known from the beginning that this would be the case, that there would be a problem with the Israelites when it came to Jesus. But at the same time, he had to establish a way to get Christ into this earth. And that's what we see this happening, which brings us to verses 6 through 8. If someone will read that for us, please.
But it is not that the word of God has taken no effect, for they are not all Israel who are of Israel, nor are they all children because they are the seed of Abraham. But in Isaac your seed shall be called, that it is. Those who are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed.
Thank you. So now he's kind of going back forth. We always called, the Israelites were always called the what? What kind of people? The chosen people. They were chosen by God. They were his people, his children. And here we see Paul saying, it's the case, but it's not. In other words, remember, there were a lot of people that were also Israelites that actually were born Israelites. We know that became proselytes. And then you have the Gentiles, which Gentiles, Gentiles have no place with God whatsoever, would ever have any place with God. And we know that's not the case. So now he brings Isaac into the situation. And he says, in Isaac your seed shall be called. Talking about this word Jesus would come through. But also those who were truly known as the house of God, not something different. And so we continue to read as we find that it was always going to be God who selected, here it is, the quality of character that would make up his people. Now, does that mean God is preordained? This side of the church building is going to be saved, this side is going to be lost. Has God ever done that? Now, are there religions that teach preordained? Without a doubt. Predestined is what they call that. And it's not the case at all. The Bible does predestine, does basically that of the church, saying that there will be a church, and a church, remember, we understand, is the people that are followers of Christ, obedient to him, and we see that. But God lets us all make our own choices. So what he's doing here is he's going to talk about Esau and Jacob, these two nations, how you got to decide who you're going to follow, who's going to be a part of God, and who wasn't. It was always God, as we said, who selected the children, meaning that these were the chosen ones when we come back to Israel, but they always had a choice. Never just of the flesh, but of the promise. So Isaac was chosen over Ishmael, and then who would be chosen over his other brother? It would be, remember, Jacob. Jacob chosen over Esau, because we already saw it, that the older would serve the who? The younger. So we see this already being made up. Which brings us down to Romans 9, verses 9 through 13, to kind of see why this is so important, to get the idea of what's happening with Jacob and Esau and Jacob. If someone go read that for us, please.
For this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him who calls. It was said to her, the older shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated.
Thank you. Now this is really important to understand. Many have misunderstood verse 13 in the book of Romans here. Totally misunderstood it as being spoken at the birth of the children. That when they were born, God said, Jacob I love, but Esau I hate. And that didn't happen at all. This didn't happen until you get all the way book of Malachi. And which book is Malachi in the Old Testament? The last book. And so very important to understand that, to realize that this wasn't God putting a curse on Esau saying, you're the terrible one. I mean, that's not what this is here. The truth is what God foresaw and foretold here in this moment. You got to go all the way back to what we're reading right now. Remember, he called these two young men, called them what? Two different what? Nations. Very important to catch them. We see that this here in Romans 9 makes more sense as we see what's happening here. As we know, the truth of what God foresaw and foretold is the fact by the time of Malachi, and knowing that Jacob and his offspring were more spiritually minded. By the time you get all the way to Malachi, more spiritually minded. And Esau was more of a what? He was more of a worldly person, we would see. Not really spiritual minded in a sense. And knowing that Esau basically was not, not the more suited one for the promise. That would come through, of course, we see Jacob. Yet even among the offspring of Jacob, and the offspring of Jacob would be who? What group of people would come through Jacob? The Israelites, without a doubt. We see the Israelites. The same process was being fulfilled with each person. The reason we need to understand this is because Jacob being that promise that it would continue. What's interesting, we've come to find out, it's not actually Israel, not physically. Even though Jesus physically comes through them, but he does that for who? Who does Jesus die for? Just the Israelites? All people, everybody. So let's continue to read. Now we're going to jump all the way forward to 9, 22, and 23. If someone read it, please.
What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath, prepared for destruction, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand for glory.
Thank you. So this we see talking about basically as each infant was born, a process continued with them and with all the world basically. There were vessels of mercy, and those mercy vessels you would call, whenever he calls a vessel, whenever he's talking about what? Usually in the Bible, it's talking about a person, an individual, that something's contained in them. But when you think about that, you go all the way back to mercy, those who that would be Moses, would be Joshua, Samuel, David, and the like that. The other vessels of wrath would have been like Korah, all those who basically came out of Egypt that decided not to follow or have faith in God except for Joshua and Caleb. And each person, each man and woman, what he said, made themselves vessels of either wrath or vessels of mercy by the choice they make. The same thing happens today. There's no difference. Not only was basically that true of Israel, but also of the Gentiles. Both had that choice. And God had made that clear through Hosea and Isaiah. Remember, even as a Gentile, you could become, underneath the chosen people, time of proselyte, as we just said earlier, a part of Israel. But then we know that finally, of course, all people would have that opportunity to always look to God. Not that they haven't always, they've always had that opportunity. While you still had the law of Israel, you also had another law still in effect. What was that? Some people were following it. The majority of the world, the patriarchal law, really when it looks to it, with what we see here, because they don't know about the law of Israel, or the law of God in that sense. Which brings us down to Romans 9, 24 to 29. Someone read this for us, please.
Even us who be called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. As he said also that Hosea, I will call them my people, who were not my people, and he beloved who he was not beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living God. Isaiah also cries out to certain Israel through the number of the children of Israel and be as the sands of the sea, the raiment which he saved. For he willing finished the work and cut it short in the righteousness, because the Lord will make a short work upon the earth. And as Israel said before, unless the Lord of the Sabbath has left us a seed, we would have become like Sodom, and we will have to be made like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Thank you. So we look at all this and go, okay, what does all this mean? What is all this about here? It's this. Hosea told Israel that God would call these vessels of mercy, my people who were not my people. And going now, he's talking about going to the Gentiles, is what we see here, referring to the vessels of mercy through Israel and the Gentiles. In other words, this is what's important. This area here, even though it's a little difficult at times to understand what's going on here, this is where you can prove and show that no one is fixed in this life. No one. No one is automatically fixed and chosen by God to come to him regardless of how you live. The vessels of wrath can become vessels of mercy. For where it was said to them, you are not my people, they shall be called the sons of the living God. As he said, Isaiah reported, we see the dismal truth that here it is, that if God had not needed Israel just to bring the seed through, just to bring Jesus through, he said Israel would have been what kind of people? The same kind of people of Sodom and Gomorrah. They would have lived the same type of lifestyle. I want you to think about that for a moment, how crazy that is when you think about this. What it tells us is that if God gives you a plan and gives you a will, which he always has, and you decide to follow it, you're going to work out right. If you don't, you're going to be bad, more than likely. And that's what we see here. You're going to follow a different direction. What I mean when I say bad, I mean you won't be with God. And so we see this through Israel was numbered as the sand of the sea, only a remnant, only a small, very minute remnant of Israel was saved. Do we realize that? Just a small amount. But look at today. Today we do everything in our countries, all throughout the world, do everything, to try to secure Israel, secure their peace and so on. And don't think I'm trying to say it's not worth helping. Everybody needs peace. Everybody should have peace. But people still believe that everything's going to be established there in Jerusalem one day. It's not. All this is going to be what? Gone. Everything's going to be gone, as we see here. So with all this coming around, what happens, the details of the birth centered on two things. First, the appearance of Esau. Notice with their birth, we're going to read it here. There's two things. Number one, the appearance. The appearance of Esau, what did he have all over his body? Hair. And then what color was it? Red. Talk about red. He looked like a hairy garment is what it said. I mean, look at this. And we also see that as we find that second was Jacob. And he held on to something. What did he hold on to when he was birthed? He grabbed onto his brother's heel, it says here. That heel, as we find in Genesis 25 to 24 to 28. If someone going to read that for us, we see what happens here.
So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob.
Thank you. So we look at this. One thing I want you to catch and notice that Rebekah and Isaac were together for 20 years before they had a child. 20 years. And very important to see that, and that's why they thought pretty much they were never having children. And they were under the same impression like Abraham that the seed would come through who? Through Isaac. And we see this happening in Rebekah, that it would come through them. So as we see this here, they called Esau red. That's what his name means, Esau red. And Jacob, it's really interesting, hill catcher, but actually translates to supplanter, as we see here in the Hebrew to the Greek. Their characters would also be different. Esau was a skillful hunter, is what it told us. An outdoorsman, without a doubt. He liked outdoors. He enjoyed knowing and challenging himself with the elements, the animals, everything that was out there. Where Jacob was more of a mild man, a man of peace, who enjoyed what could be done inside a home, meditating, reading, learning. That's where we see him in that sense. More educated we see than that, of course, of Esau. These characteristics, what they do is they lead to a terrible favoritism in which Isaac loved Esau and favored him. And it actually says why? Because he liked his food. I mean, like that. What do I say that? He liked the way he'd go out and hunt and do these things and the things he would bring to him and have that. He wanted to give, think about this, he wanted to give the blessing to Esau is what Isaac wanted to do. But what did God say? God said that's not the way this was going to happen. This isn't the way this is going to take place. So Rebekah loved Jacob, and so instead of waiting on God, just like we saw with Sarah and Abraham, Rebekah jumps in, and she's going to make the decision, of course, to deceive her husband, to lie to him, and just a terrible case as we see all that happening, which with our last little bit of time here, we see that Esau, it's going to close with him selling his birthright. The only real account we have of their youth centered basically first on the fact that Esau was a hunter, an outdoorsman, while Jacob was an indoor man, we would say. And the only reference to this, we have to this mildness of Esau, because, of Jacob, we go, well, where was he mild? It said that he was knew how to do what? Which a lot of the men didn't do back then. Cook. He could cook, and we see he was able to do that. Just want to read Genesis 25, 29 through 30, please.
Now Jacob cooked the stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name was called Edom.
Thank you. Now, I know usually we're like, hey, I thought there's more story of this, dying and so on. We see other parts of as we go on. But the details here are simple. Esau's hungry. He's hungry. Jacob has the food to satisfy the hunger. Instead of simply giving it to him, Jacob is going to use this occasion to take this birthright. And he's still under the impression it's okay because God said what? That I'm supposed to have that. And guarantee his mom has told him that. So it manifests a lack of faith on his part since God had already promised the elder would serve the younger. But like Sarah with Hagar, it appears that Jacob was going to basically take matters into his own hands. And we know that he does it with him and his mom. And a terrible situation, what all happens through here. But we do see with this family, even though they're moving in the right direction of the seed, they have a lot of problems that we see going over time, which they're human beings just like anybody else. Genesis 25, 31 through 34, we'll close it out. I'll go ahead and read it. But Jacob said, sell your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I am about to what? I'm about to die. Do you think he was really going to die? Do you think he could have found food and not died? Without a doubt. How many of us have ever said, I'm starving to what? Starving to death, and you wonder where this comes from. You go back to the Bible. Look at this, it's interesting. So he said, I'm going to die, so what is the birthright to me? I don't care anymore about this. It's just crazy. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and then he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright, as we see at that point. And that's where this ends today in Genesis chapter 25. Next week, Wednesday we'll look at 26 and move on from there. Any comments, questions? I know there's a lot involved in this study right here. If I had 3 days of study, 3 different times we could learn it, it'd be a lot easier to go through it and see what's there and explain Romans very, very well. But I just want to show you that this all came to the point of dealing with 2 nations. That's what this is all about. One nation that would follow God and one nation that didn't follow God. And just because you're an Israelite, just because you're a Gentile, doesn't mean you're automatically a part of one of those nations. You have to make that choice, just like you and I today. There's 2 nations in a sense of the world, and that is those who are saved and those who are unsaved. And we need to make the right choice to be a part of those who are saved through Jesus Christ, of course. And we'll close there. Any comments or questions before we close? Nobody at all? All right, thanks. Appreciate your time.